Morning to everyone. To begin with, I wish His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, a very happy 87th birthday. May His Holiness live many years to bless all sentient beings. Well, I'm Denzil, Assistant Program Coordinator of Tibet House, New Delhi, and I'll be moderating today's second session. So for this session, we have a very interesting and relevant topic, especially in this age and time in the world, titled The Pillars for Sustainable Development Goals of UNO. As always, we at the Tibet House are very grateful to our speakers for accepting our invitation and being a part of this panel. So the chairperson for this session is Dr. Denzil Fernandes, SJ, Secretary at the Indian Social Institute, New Delhi. And the speakers for our second sessions are Dr. Tina Anil. Dr. Tina will speak on universal ethics in the context of sociology. Our second speaker for this session is Professor Tanja Sharma. Professor Sharma will speak on universal ethics in the context of economy. And then we have Professor Kaveri Gill. Professor Kaveri Gill will speak in the context of environment. And finally, we have with us Mr. Riaan Kumar as the fourth speaker for this session. Mr. Riaan will speak on youth for universal ethics. Now, without taking much time, I would like to request our chairperson and the speakers to please come on stage and take your respective seats. Thank you. So after the last speaker speaks, we will have 20 minutes in the end of this session for Q&A. So therefore, I would like to request everyone to reserve your questions until the end. So before I proceed with today's second session, I would like to share a brief introduction about today's chairperson. Dr. Denzil Fernandes, SJ, is a Jesu priest belonging to a Jesu province. He is currently the Executive Director of Indian Social Institute, New Delhi, a premier Jesu Social Research Institute in India. He is also the editor of the quarterly journal, Social Action, a Universal Grants Commission approved social science journal. He holds 2 postgraduate degrees in economics and politics from the Pune University and was awarded PhD in social science from Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai in 2012. He has co-authored the books Submergence of Justice in 2007, Dalit Women in Social Conflict, The Case of Haryana in 2019. He is also the co-editor of the books Labor Migration in Post-Liberalization Era in 2019, Minorities and Nation Building 2019, and Social Harmony and Justice, Perspectives of Dalit Women in 2020. He has participated in several national and international seminars and conferences. He has written several articles in reputed journals on labor, economics, politics, migration, and sustainable development. He was conferred the Delhi Minorities Commission Human Rights Award in 2019 for his work on human, civil, and minority rights in India. So with this, I now request Dr. Denzil Fernandes, SJ, to kindly proceed the session. Thank you.
Very good morning to all of you, and especially I thank Tibet House and Keshe Dorjiji for inviting me for this conference on this special occasion of the birthday, 87th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. On behalf of the Society of Jesus, as well as Indian Social Institute, the staff and the management, I wish His Holiness Dalai Lama, long life, good health, and continuing his mission of compassion and love in this world. Today, this morning, now we are having this session on universal ethics of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the pillars of Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs of UNO. And I'm very happy to be this chairperson on this panel, which has Dr. Tina Anil, who will speak on universal ethics in the context of sociology. I'm happy that she was also the staff of Indian Social Institute a few years ago, and we were colleagues. Professor Tanja Sharma, Dr. Kaveri Gill, and Mr. Riaan Kumar. I'm very happy to be chairperson on this panel. Now, coming to Sustainable Development Goals, it is very pertinent that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is promoting universal ethics. And we just heard that while education promotes intellectual development, what His Holiness the Dalai Lama is promoting the development of the heart, promotion of love, the promotion of compassion. And this is very important not only for our country, but also the world. My institute, Indian Social Institute, we also engage in what in Hindi it is called Shanti Sadbhavna, peace and social harmony. One of the important factors of discord is the lack of respect, lack of mutual respect towards the other. We are all different. There is so much of variety. And this is an expression of creation. There are no two trees or two plants that are exactly the same. Everything is unique, everything is different. It is a reflection of the creative nature of God. But when this diversity, this variety is not treated with the necessary respect and acknowledgement of the differences, then there are conflicts. We are in a country that is the most diverse in this world. We have different cultures, we have different languages, we have different ways of dressing, eating, music, art, culture. But if we consider the other as an enrichment, then there's going to be harmony, there's going to be development. But when we consider this diversity, this variety as a threat, then there's definitely going to be social disharmony. It could lead to violence, as we are seeing today. It could lead to wars and genocide, mass killings, and so on. So, as we are here to celebrate universal ethics, we have at the global level the Sustainable Development Goals, which actually came from the Millennium Development Goals. There were 8 goals in 2000, but in 2015, after deliberating on the progress of the Millennium Development Goals, we realized that that it needs to be sustainable, and the ecological crisis was much more serious. And therefore, the Sustainable Development Goals not only focuses on basic needs of a person for survival, like there's no poverty, no hunger, health, education, water, sanitation, energy, and so on. But also the sustainable aspect. The ecological sustainability is also factored in when there are goals such as climate action, being concerned about the seas, the oceans, life on land, and so on. In addition to this, we also have in the Sustainable Development Goals peace and justice. There can be no peace without justice. And therefore, we need to have strong institutions that promote peace and justice. In this case, I would say one of the most important institutions in every country is the judiciary, where there is a sense that that there is justice, especially to those who are at the margins. So today, as we are going to enter into this panel discussion, I invite initially Dr. Tina Anil. Dr. Tina Anil teaches at the School of Global Affairs, Ambedkar University, Delhi. After completing her doctoral studies in sociology from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, she was also a visiting fellow from 2017 to 18 at CSDS, New Delhi. She worked at the Indian Social Institute, New Delhi, as a research associate and as a research associate at Indian Council for Social Science Research. She has participated in a number of national conferences and presented research papers, published articles, and contributed edited books similar with her research interest on social inequality and inclusion, gender marginality, and citizenship. And so now I invite Dr. Tina Anil to speak on universal ethics in the context of sociology.
Good morning to everyone. Before I begin, I must thank our venerable teacher, Geshe Dorji Damdula, and the team of Tibet House for inviting me on this very auspicious occasion on the 87th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And before I really begin and the topic on which I'm going to speak to, let me just share some of my observation. So in this post-pandemic phase, when our economies and societies are transforming radically, a conference of this kind, as organized by Tibet House at Tibet House, the cultural center of His Holiness of Dalai Lama, plays an important role by bringing us together and providing an opportunity to reimagine, reshape our future as a human family. On this very occasion, I'm very happy to share some of my thoughts on the very sustainable development goals that are being suggested by UN, and they are to be achieved by 2030. As a student of sociology and somebody who has an interest in public policy and governance, I would be revisiting the sustainable development goal from the very universal ethics perspective as suggested by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now, before I go, let me just briefly share an outline of the discussion, what I would be talking about. As one of my colleague and, of course, a friend who is at dais with me, Kaveri ji, has just mentioned that this panel is more to do with problematizing what we have at hand. And so to begin with, I would be problematizing definitely universal values, which has its foundation in modern philosophy and the very grand project of modernity. Then I would move on to United Nations emphasis on universal values for accomplishing sustainable development goals and transforming society. A brief historical background to the sustainable development goals, principles on which it is very much established. Further on, the paper would also be looked at a critical case study or analysis of United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 6 precisely, which talks about ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. And of course, because of my own research interest in manual scavenging as an occupational or indignified occupation, I would be also looking at national level initiatives to eradicate manual scavenging within and from the universal ethics perspective as suggested by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which will be followed by a conclusion. So to begin with an introduction to the paper, that borrowing from the post-enlightenment philosophy of modernity, United Nations has emphasized definitely on the role of universal values of equality, liberty, and fraternity, emphasizing that it is what enables the sustainable development goals to be truly transformating by placing the person and their inherent dignity at the heart of development efforts, empowering all people to become active partners in this endeavor. As we are aware that universal values has been the pillar of modern philosophy, and especially the democratic countries across the world who has eventually become part of the constitutions, who has made them eventually become the part of their constitutions as a part of welfare state, yet our society, communities, and individuals continue to experience degenerations of different kinds. We know that despite universal values like equality, liberty, fraternity as a mandate to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we continue to experience, or we are yet to experience social regeneration, which is also one of the very important emphasis of the very founding father of sociology, Max Weber, Emil Durkheim, and Karl Marx. But before I go on further, I would like to emphasize on what is the difference between universal values and universal ethics. I think it is very important to have that differentiation in our mind. And to my understanding, the little that I've read about, values, as we know, are the ideas of someone or a group about what is good and bad, which is desirable or undesirable. On the other hand, ethics is all about reasoning, how to do the right action. So values, you have a choice, but ethics is more about how to implement that. Whereas values motivate us, while moral and ethics, they put a kind of constraint on us. So having said that, it is in this context, the paper adopts His Holiness framework of universal ethics as proposed by His Holiness to critically examine the limitations why we have not been able to achieve sustainable development goals, and why, of course, the timeline is 2030, but I have been looking through a report which has been submitted by the Secretary General, the progress, that advancement, whatever as advancement has been made in achieving sustainable development goals. And the report very much suggests there are limitations to it. Hence, I would be looking at those particular limitations, that what are the failures in achieving sustainable goals so far. With this, the paper also explores the role of universal ethics in enabling us to go beyond abstract aggregates, numericals, materialistic, infrastructural, statistical aspect to address discrimination and other root cause of inequality. So, of course, as I know, and we all are aware of, from the morning onwards, everyone who is at dais have been talking about that there is a time that we need to emphasize on educating our heart, and what moral education, or what modern education has actually done is been emphasizing on the very statistics, materialistic, numerical aspect of achieving or defining the progress and defining the happiness. So there is a need, as His Holiness, as Venerable Geshe-la has just suggested, that there is a need to have a paradigm shift, which actually lies at the heart of human mind. So on 75th anniversary of United Nations and 5th anniversary of the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals, the emphasis is placed on adopting universal values. In September 2015, the General Assembly adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals, building on the principle of leaving no one behind, but how that was not very clear. How would they achieve that? And what are the principles that they would be following it? The new agenda emphasizes a holistic approach to achieve sustainable development goal, but of course there is no clarity about what is the holistic, how do they define the holistic. However, a close reading of Goal 6 that I have just mentioned before, that this is what the paper would be emphasizing on, the discussion would be emphasizing on, is Goal 6 out of the 17 goals that are already laid out in Sustainable Development Goals. And I would definitely be looking at the very structural aspect of this goal, the Goal 6, which talks about ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. I quote from the goal, what is this goal is about, and how it's been mentioned there. Goal 6, which goes on like that: access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene is the most basic human need for health and well-being. Billions of people will lack access to basic services in 2030 unless progress made. Demand for water supply is rising due to rapid population growth, urbanization, increasing water needs from agriculture, industry, and energy sector. Decades of misuse, poor management, over-extraction of groundwater, and contamination of freshwater supplies have exacerbated water stress. In addition, countries facing growing challenges linked to degraded water-related ecosystem, water scarcity caused by climate change, underinvestment in water and sanitation, and insufficient cooperation on transboundary waters. Importantly, the UN Economic and Social Council report summary of summary which is submitted by Secretary General, which discuss about the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, admits the fact that there is underinvestment in water and sanitation, though it addresses the challenges to sustainable water management, but it is completely silent on the sanitation aspect. Now, stating that between 2015 to 2020, the population using safely managed drinking water services increased from 70% to 74%. The population with safety managed sanitation increased from 40. Okay. So the population increasingly having a very safe sanitation, which has increased from 47 to 54%. And so all of this coverage that is being talked about, it hardly says much, but it says much about the water crisis, but nothing much to say about sanitation. Even structurally, as I said, the structural criticism to this is that it's emphasizing on hand washing facilities, soaps and water and toilets being constructed. Importantly, if one looks at this, and one would find that implicitly the sanitation, there's nothing much is being talked about sanitation and the challenges to sustainable sanitation management, apart from hand washing and availability of soap and toilet facilities. Of course, the very emphasis on infrastructural investment while ignoring the potential to human investment. And I would discuss this in another different context at national level. As I said it, as a student of sociology and my larger interest in public policy and governance, a careful analysis of a very perpetual existence of a caste-based hereditary manual scavenging communities that continue to serve, especially in our urban India, often made me curious that the role of welfare state, which completely ignores the well-being of the people from the community. And I looked at various, for my own PhD research, I've looked at various committees that has made suggestions about how the night soil management has to be taken place, but those committees, those reports have remained very silent about the well-being and human rights of the people from the manual scavenging community. There are reports which says that there are National Safai Karamchari Finance and Development Corporation, which again emphasize on providing some financial assistance to the people from the community who are pushed into this caste-based job, but there is nothing much to say how to take them out of it. So that's one of the national level context, apart from what I critically look at the Goal 6 of UN Sustainable Development Goal. And I felt it was very important to bring in on this platform that the many academic reading that I have gone through clearly emphasize that there is a clear there is a clear lack of political will and political intent, which definitely comes from heart. That's what I believe in, and as what all I have understood from His Holiness readings. So that's one thing, and there's a lack of political will and intent because primarily in Indian context, it is been there because of the very caste system that exists. So even the policymakers who are there, if you look at all the reports and suggestions that they have made, they precisely talk about building more toilets than eradicating the very indignified occupation altogether. And that's precisely suggests that how the dichotomy of purity and impurity continue to work in Indian context. So that was a very important point that I thought I should be making it, and that how the very mind that suggests us the kind of policy that we make, even if you look at how the way state comes up with the different kinds of program to eradicate manual scavenging, it again limits to financial help, to some kind of scholarship. Yeah, I'll just take 2 minutes and briefly conclude this. So having said all of it, I place two important contexts. One is SDGs Goal 6 and about the manual scavenging community. I personally, from my own research experience, suggest that nothing can be done about both the sanitation as well as for the people who are pushed to continue to the caste-based occupation unless and until things are not changed from the heart. And for that, we need to realize the very principle of interdependence as been suggested by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I just want to quote from His Holiness book Beyond Religion, and that's when I would end this discussion. Paraphrasing His Holiness thoughts on the matter from his book Beyond Religion, if human beings lack moral values, self-discipline, then no matter how many rules, laws there might be, it cannot be of any help. As long as priorities are given to materialism, will continue to suffer from fraud, corruption, inequality, impatience and greed, and not pay much attention to inner values. In order to inculcate inner values of love, patience, forgiveness, generosity, contentment, self-discipline, restraint, and so forth, it is crucial to integrate implement moral values within the education system from the time of kindergarten itself and and right up to the university level. Otherwise, the situation will degenerate even further from where we stand right now. So with that, I'll stop here. This is a work in progress. So your comments, observation will be highly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tina Anil, for your presentation. We shall move on to the next presentation by Professor Tanuja Sharma. Dr. Tanuja Sharma is a full professor in HRM area and lead for Center of Excellence for Ethics, ESG initiatives, and responsible organization CIRO in MDI Gurgaon. Prior to this, she was a faculty in Delhi University. Her PhD was from FMS Delhi University, awarded for one of the most innovative work by Mercer Award, Singapore, Asia. She has contributed extensively by publication, teaching, training, and consulting in the field of human resource management, and has guided doctoral work on topics including gender issues, dignity at work, happiness at work, vipassana, and social capital, to mention a few. Her latest work is a book from Springer Nature on responsible leadership for sustainability in uncertain times to address the concerns of leadership crisis in current times. Post her exposure to Buddhist philosophy under her teacher, Geshe Dorji Damdul, director of Tibet House, New Delhi, she has been teaching business ethics to MBA students in MDI Gurgaon. I invite Professor Tanuja Sharma to speak on universal ethics in the context of economy.
I hope I'm audible. Though there is a presentation, which you can possibly just view there, but I decide to speak from heart. It's an extremely auspicious day. His Holiness Dalai Lama is born, on 6th of September. I think I'm comfortable. Okay, as you wish. Okay. Am I seen better? All right. I think it is more important that I'm heard than seen. So coming back to it, why is it such a special day, especially for a person like me? I got number of occasions to be, around him. Never wanted one-on-one meeting because I think he's too precious to take time. And only thing is, I looked at him and I really thought, is it possible to be at this state in human life? His face, his skin, his eyes, his speaking is amazing. I mean, I don't have words really to explain that. And I am a person who's skeptical, modern, Western mode, educated, into teaching, where our job and research, where our job is asking questions, rejecting most of the hypotheses if possible. Okay. But, with him, I just find only admiration and positiveness, and whatever I'm speaking is really less than what I feel. When I got my first chance to, from a comparatively close listening, apart from Talkatora and the, big shows in Delhi, was accidental travel to Dharamshala. A very kind Tibetan couple, I just went unplanned, and very kind Tibetan couple actually just hand-holded me, and he said, do you know teaching is happening of His Holiness? I didn't know what teaching is, I must confess. It is years and years ago. And then, they shared their translator because the language was Tibetan. And it was an ultimate and conventional reality. I always say that that was a turning point in my life. I'm still employed. I still am teaching. But my heart is in, the philosophy which he is really ensuring that comes to very common mind and heart like ours. And thanks, Geshe-la, Tibet House director, who has been, a guiding light for us in translating, all the Nalanda text. And I am not a very great student, but having said that, whatever I've understood, I'm extremely grateful for that. Now, my efforts after being exposed to Buddhist philosophy, and no, before that, I want to mention one more thing. I have to mention it today, that past karmic connection is all the explanation I have, because I was a science graduation, then after that management, business management. I'm in a premier business school which teaches only exploitation, 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 and exploitation of human resources and exploitation of natural resources. We have finished good quality water, forest, everything we are on to. And I was teaching the subjects, compensation management, how to hook the talent to ensure that they, master exploitation of resources. And I was teaching performance management, my research area, that what to do knowing them. And trust me, I really got into it, so that they can never understand your game and they play your game. So vision sharing, we call it in management. All right. But having said that, that accidental meeting, no looking back, 6th of September in Tushita. And I'm sorry I'm taking that time, but I think this is very important. We got a small cake and a flag. And suddenly something happened and I got my call to travel through Lhasa. And two things I want to share. Number one, I feel blessed that I got that opportunity to stay in Nobelinka in his house, which he left, and prayed that can he come here faster, sooner, in the best of health. And I'm sure the universe is listening to that prayer. Number one. Number two, that little flag, it's again karmic connection, was in a corner of my purse. And I hope all of us know that when you travel with something like that, you can be imprisoned. And I'm saying it outright. And you know what? Gyanse, Shikadze, by road we were coming from Lhasa to Kathmandu border. And in one village, I don't know how it happened, one woman there selling trinket started just folding hand that you are in my God's land, your land has my God. And suddenly, that small photograph came up. And I really, really want to share that the emotion which I had that day is an emotion which is not to be repeated again in life. So His Holiness is very special. He has been very successful in changing many minds and hearts, from hardcore German scientists to Harvard Business School professors. There is a nice YouTube available, which I think all of us must see, where during pandemic time, when he addressed Harvard Business School professor, and I'm naming it because it's supposed to be the Mecca of business, and I come from business school. All the professors, when you ask the question, and His Holiness, the way he answers, you just wonder, why aren't we just following what he's talking about? And this hero worship is coming to my mind only because of who he is, embodied, ethical presence on this earth. Universal ethics, I think, is a call for global transformation. Since I am here today, and 5, 7, 8 more minutes possibly I'll take, and let me know if I'm exceeding my time. Only thing is I understood that, science is important. Subjective subjects like sociology and art is extremely important. But all the subjects actually have to have, as my earlier, speakers also said, basis in the right viewing. And those frameworks which I have learned a little bit from my classes, in Tibet House, tells me that without that, nothing makes sense. Now, to my business students, I have decided that I am teaching only business ethics. I can't teach ethics or universal ethics, but business ethics, because that is a little limitation of the employment I'm into. And there, I am dedicating one whole conversation around, topic of universal ethics. His Holiness Dalai Lama's 2-3 books, starting from Ethics in New Millennium. Some slides, and that's why I got them, are contributed by those 99 percentile students who otherwise will only like American and European languages. And you will be very surprised that the 5-6 years before, when I introduced this subject to them about universal ethics, I was losing courage in the class because their listening was Aristotle, Plato, John Rawls' Justice, Kantian principles, and anything to do which is not scientific, established, global conversation was not good enough. I am very happy to say that on His Holiness' birthday today, that students are taking very keen interest on 2 sessions, one on Gandhi and one on His Holiness Dalai Lama. And batch after batch, they are picking up. They are picking up and they are talking about it. So and another thing, a small presentation, because we were talking about SDG goals and we were talking about, business. So I thought, let me just connect. But with that emotion only I begin. So the very first thing, which I really want to put before your eyes, I have a critical eye, I have a critical mind, is this poverty. This picture I could never forget. This artist, works street art. And in this picture, the boy is merged with the stairs. Is it visible? Is it very clear? I hope so. And it says the child is depicted sitting on steps, being stepped on and stepped over to illustrate how invisible the poor living among us can be. That's a reality we live. Very quickly, inequality kills, especially for India. Humongous amount of inequality. And I'm just rushing through these slides. You see the 8 modern jars, which are actually respected far more than prime ministers even of US or India or wherever. Starting from, of course, you have Amazon boss, Jeff Bezos, and so on and so forth. And, they command more than 50% of the all wealth of the globe. Yeah? Yeah, please. Okay, sorry. So, and this is how the inequality is, that more than half of the population of global world, actually, whatever they can have collectively, these 8 people command. Is it a fair world to live on? United Nations has been taking a call, my friend right now shared so much about it. And SDG goals, thank God they're overarching goal, and thank God, that business is looking at it. Yeah, in my institution, which is a very knowledgeable institution and present very nicely globally and locally, when I mentioned last year that I want a center of excellence and I want to link it with SDG, I was asked by almost all concerned, SDG is social phenomena. What are you doing in business? So this is a level of ignorance the wealth centers carry. But we forget that ultimately the stakeholder of business carries is the public, and public is us. Even the families of those corporate honkos, So thankfully, everybody is getting educated, and now my classes are starting from SDG. And equal poverty is the very first pillar, as we know. Another discourse, quickly I'm wanting to wrap up, is happening on responsible leadership, which is taking my attention. Because some good things are talked about where at least a conversation from the business. And why business also I want to address, because if you really look at it, governments are coming and going. But the businesses and the crony businesses are same. So that is why they're the most dominant citizen, I would say, of the globe and India. So just, getting your attention to the critical things, I wanted to come today, for universal ethics context. Basically, the qualities of responsible leaders, nothing else but what His Holiness is saying even more simply, value-based, self-image, introspection, and so on and so forth. And the relationship between leader and follower. What makes a responsible leader, I'm not going into the details, but 2 things I want to mention. And one thing is, instead of IQ, they're talking about relational intelligence, which is nothing but emotional intelligence. Gisela had a chance to actually be with the main scholar there, and the ethical intelligence. And that's what I understood, what I'm receiving from the classes in with the basic tenets of Buddhist philosophy. Please read this. Organizations die not because of murder, they commit suicide, because they don't understand the pulse of the time. Pulse of the time is the human connect. Pulse of the time is what, His Holiness is talking about daily, virtually, to all corner of the globe. I hope we are listening. I think many people are listening, but I think governments also need to listen. Decision maker in various critical positions need to listen. And I really feel CEOs of the company really need to listen, because if they exploit all, who will they sell anything anyway? Conversation is there. European leadership is there on ESG, economic, social, and governance. And I hope it is not the talk on the table, but also talk with the spirit in it. The way, So I'll just like to actually, now this is something which shared by my students. So I'll just show, I'm sure, this particular audience is really aware of all his work of His Holiness Dalai Lama and what he's talking on universal ethics. But what really made sense to my students, and I want to share with you on his birthday today, young people are also getting impacted who are just not groomed for that, is, what is the foundation of ethics, the way he has explained it in his book, Ethics in New Millennium. And how exactly, ethics and beliefs can actually reside, at the individual and level. And it is not based on religion, but it is based on our thoughts and ideas and way of being. Not knowing only, not doing only, but way of being. Quickly to conclude, ethics in society. What is the affluent society, matter of heart, and the beyond differences we have been talking about. The way, his books have come out in articulating the universal ethics. I don't see any other literature that rich right now. And ethics in individual, of course, because that is a basic difference I found in my Western models and my Eastern philosophy angle, that here the focus is on the code of conduct, the 6 perfections and ethics at individual level, and some of individuals actually create a collective mass. So wisdom and compassion being 2 main pillars. And the ethics of restraint, ethics of patience, developing patience and compassion to be the essence. Just closing it, redefining the goal is required. Habits need to change. Our problem is we are too conventional and fear change despite that. Questions we ask ourselves and answers we found. And that is something is out of my class material. So the questions we ask is the competition the evil of all? And answer is, larger level collaboration is the cognition of human being, only specially attributed to human beings. The need for universal ethics on his birthday, I think cannot be more emphasized. And my congratulations to Tibet House to organize a discourse on that. Peace in the world depends on the peace in the hearts of individuals. His quote, which I keep, this depends on each of us practicing ethics by disciplining negative thoughts, a constant training, emotions, and developing basic spiritual quality. And I would say my study in Tibet House actually has been helping in my life at least. And last but not the least, to not be a beast as a human being and be a good person is important. Because when we die, we certainly have a reflection. If we don't have reflection all through, I wish we have. And then, the only I think is mental inquiry. And I close with this, that we are extremely emotional being. And thankfully, Geshe-la, I'm so thankful to you that after learning from you, I understood that like a physical exercise and physical muscles, this also is a matter of mental muscle. And once those muscles are built in the right manner, I think we can really have a globe which is far more livable than where we are today. I close with that. Thank you so much. And my apology for time.
Hello. Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, for your wonderful presentation of ethics. In the context of the economy, the context of inequality, and how we need to use the universal ethics of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to promote more compassion and harmony. Now we move on to Professor Kaveri Gill. Professor Kaveri Gill is Professor and Head of Department of International Relations and Governance Studies at Shiv Nadar University. She is the former principal of the Dalai Lama Institute of Higher Education, Bengaluru. Kaveri has also completed Nalanda Master's course at Tibet House. So invite Dr. Kaveri to speak.
Respected Chairperson, the Director of Tibet House, Venerable Geshe-la, colleagues and friends, and the very young panelist also. I'm looking forward to hear from him. So I'm absolutely delighted to be a part of this very important conference celebrating the 87th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And as Geshe-la said, there'll be many celebrations today, songs, dances, 1 kg cakes, Palden Lamo Puja, all of which wonderful. But I think also here what we are trying to do is think about the ideas of His Holiness that, as Professor Tanuja ji said, His Holiness has lived by, that is apparent to anybody who meets him, who doesn't have a context of his Tibetan identity or even that identity of a Tibetan Buddhist simple monk, as he calls himself. So he has lived by this message and he has tried to pass it on to us. And today, I think the focus of this conference is really looking at, what we can all do to talk about his ideas and take them forwards in different ways. So I want to begin by reading out His Holiness's powerful and poignant message for the World Earth Day that was celebrated on 22nd April. He says, on Earth Day 2022, let us remember that everybody wants to live a happy life. Not only human beings, but animals, birds, and insects too. And all of us should be concerned about our collective existence. As human beings, our marvelous brains provide us with remarkable opportunities to do good. But if we look at how the world is today, we should be able to do better. We need a more holistic education, an education that incorporates inner values, such as a compassionate concern for others' well-being. Our world is heavily interdependent. New challenges like the climate crisis that affect us all, as well as our participation in the global economy, mean that we must take the whole of humanity into account. We have to put the global interests first. And I hope that during the course of this conference, this notion of interconnectedness, to be honest, I could have given the talk that Dr. Tina Anil has given. I could have given the talk that Dr. Tanuja Sharma ji has given, and the one I've given from different angles. They are all so interconnected. We need to take urgent steps to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and to adopt renewable sources of energy, such as those that rely on the wind and the power of the sun. We must pay attention to deforestation and protect the environment better. We have to plant and care for more trees. In my own life, I have witnessed the decline in snowfall, first in Tibet and later in Dharamsala. Indeed, some scientists have told me that there is a risk of places like Tibet, which is the third pole, eventually becoming deserts. And they are going to take this to COP27 in Egypt, the notion of Tibetan environment as a critical issue for the world. That is why I am committed to speaking out for the protection of Tibet's fragile environment. Our life is based on hope, a desire for things to turn out well. Hope is concerned with the future. Although nothing about the future can be guaranteed, we remain hopeful, which is much better than being pessimistic. Even as global warming increases in intensity, many young people in particular are working together to find and share solutions. They are our hope. Nowadays, when we face serious problems as a result of the climate crisis, we have to help each other by setting a timetable for change. As human beings living on this one planet, we must make an effort to live happily together. The threat of climate change is not limited by national boundaries. It affects us all. We must work to protect nature and the planet, which is our only home. So this is something that Ambassador Virendra Gupta ji also spoke about in the morning, So this talk is going to be, because I was asked to speak in the context of the environment, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals in the context of the environment. So the contemporary context of the environment, if we think about it in terms of the SDGs, it is really goal number 13. And that calls for urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And then along with all of these goals, as were mentioned, there are 17 of them. You have 5 targets and many indicators to try and set some kind of a blueprint that we can measure ourselves where we are in 2030. And to set this in context, the world did not meet the Millennium Development Goals, and that is why we now are where we are, as Dr. Tina Anil was also mentioning. To again emphasize the interconnectedness, 12 out of these 17 SDGs involve taking action on climate change. So though they may be put under different headings, actually there is interconnectedness at a very fundamental level. Why is urgent action required? I think today I don't need to spell it out, but basically the greenhouse gas emissions from human activity, very much related to Professor Tanujaji's talk on businesses, the notion of growth as an economist, and a critical one at that, I have to mention that. All of that, it's driving climate change, and of course we can feel its impact, we see it. You can open the news, you can look at news about changing weather patterns, rising sea levels, and all of that. And basically, without action, it is forecast that during the 21st century, we will have a rise of 3 degrees Celsius on the surface temperature, and this would be absolutely catastrophic for the entire the planet Earth, all its inhabitants, species extinction. But in the meantime, as some of these talks indicated, it is the poorest and the most vulnerable who are also being affected disproportionately. So now to address climate change in a nutshell, the most significant agreement so far was the Paris Agreement, COP21 of 2015, where basically all the countries came together to agree that try and limit to below 2 degrees centigrade increase and ideally above 1.5 Celsius. But what is the problem? The problem is that this requires collective action across various identities. The global north and the south, or the developed and the developing world, putting the interests of future generations before our own, even though they are not present with us today, then putting the interests even within a country on the poorer people. Dr. Tina Anil spoke about scavenging castes. We can talk about the indigenous communities, living forest-dependent communities, whether they are in India. Ambassador Virendra Gupta ji spoke about Naxalism related to overuse of resources. But we can talk about the Amazon forests in Brazil. There was just a murder recently of this Guardian journalist and somebody who was helping him talk about and write about what is happening in the Amazon forest. So that is what we are talking about. So this collective action is very problematic. And basically, they had a recent COP26, which was in Glasgow. It recently concluded, and there was a lot of discussion and chit-chat, but the central question on how to reduce emissions was not really much touched upon, and nor was much progress made. Now, what is the kind of problem here? And I'm just going to relate it. I think first I just put the problem in the mundane language, and then we can think about it a little more technical. So I think number one, of course, is economy. So we heard about liberty, fraternity, equality, all these liberal principles being the foundation of the very notion of United Nations organizations, Bretton Woods institutions that came up in the post-World War II context. But if we look at economy and we look at the actual reality, we will see that, rich countries have pumped billions of dollars into fossil fuels during pandemic. The greed of governments, businesses, individuals, unbridled capitalism, this was mentioned in the morning. The war in Ukraine, and again here the concerns of economy overriding people's well-being. For instance, now the EU, they are again talking about opening coal plants because they are not getting enough energy from Russia. So they are backtracking on their own kind of goals because coal is one of the dirtiest fuels in terms of the environment. And indeed, if we go into a discussion of NATO membership itself and all the issues with that, we can question this notion of whether equality, fraternity, and liberty has actually been lived. Then, of course, the rich and poor countries divide. So in the acknowledgement of colonialism and all our past history, there has been that, there is common but differentiated responsibility for richer and poorer countries. So the environmental agreements at the Paris Convention and others have acknowledged that the richer countries have grown richer on the back of exploitation of entire continents, right? That was the whole colonial project. But now the developed countries are not giving the money promised, climate finance aid. And in the morning, there was again speak of trust. And if you don't have trust, we study in game theory, in economics, that without trust, a lot of your agreements are going to fall through. In this case, the global south and poorer countries are not really trusting the richer ones that they are going to cut back on the economic activity and help them also reach a better state and all of that. In terms of the urgency, the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they bring out a report every 7 years, and there are thousands of scientists involved. And they have said, they brought one out on April 2022, that it's now or never if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 centigrade. They basically go on to say that without immediate reductions, it's kind of the last call for all of us. And as I said, we are talking about species extinction here. Now, if I go into a little more detailed context, because I was asked to speak about universal ethics in the context of the environment. So now I said the problem is that our interconnectedness requires cooperation, and we cannot bring ourselves to cooperate for our mutual benefit, and this is for various reasons. So negative externalities we study, the diversions between your private and social costs and benefits, these are really vast in the nature of, in the area of environment. And in fact, the notion of environmental externalities came up, externalities themselves, that basically your costs and benefit diverge from those of society. And me as a private actor, I don't need to take account of this, so I can carry on. The second thing is heavily discounting of future generations' well-being. So in the morning, there was a lot of talk about longer-term perspective. And again, why is this important? Because politically speaking, most governments across the world have a very short-term and instrumental perspective that they just need to get re-elected. The other problem in the environment is the geographically dispersed nature, so transcending conventional boundaries of nation states and so on, right? So in the environment, there's no one nation versus the other. We are all in the same boat, sink or swim. Then the highly inequitable source of origin and incidence of impact, both within and between countries, so that the rich are largely the cause and the result falls disproportionately on the poor. Be this poor, whether they are within a country, the forest-dependent peoples, the Adivasis, the Dalit, the black, we can name many identities, and it is falling disproportionately on them. The last issue is the anthropogenic climate change that also points to inequity of the causal contribution and the burden of impact on ecosystems. And here COVID is the best example. Whether COVID escaped from a lab in China or there was something more, the fact is, why were we undertaking research on bats? For preventative, really kind of warfare of the kind that I really don't want to even think much about. It's too scary. So in the morning, Venerable Geshe-la, there was a discussion of Darwinian ideas. And by the way, the research, exactly as he said, now the present research is saying that even Charles Darwin never exactly meant the way it has been taken out of context, survival of the fittest. And there is an increasing view backed by research that it is cooperation and not competition that is going to result in our survival. So, as Geshe-la said in the morning, that compassion suffices. So, I think that we need to seriously look at something that has driven us all for so long. So, now to come back to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for whom we are here today, celebration. Tunkar. And here I want to say how extraordinary he is. There are our monastics from Dripung Loseling, our esteemed monastery of our Geshe-la. And I want to say that, when you look at the two pillars for universal ethics, whether we call it our common humanity and our desire for happiness and to avoid suffering, and number two, our interconnectedness, or sometimes His Holiness puts it in a skillful way, non-violence and harmlessness, putting others before self, caring for them, and the interdependent arising and interconnectedness. Or we go a bit deeper because actually the Nalanda philosophical tradition is upheld only by the Tibetans really today, not Indians, I would say, as Dipesh Thakur last said in the morning. Then we go deeper, it is Tongni and Ningje. And we can have a whole discussion about the basis and emptiness and the skill or the method side. So His Holiness is skill when we feel a little bit depressed about how the challenges are too vast. I think we need to think about how much difference a single individual can make. And in this, I want to say that, the solutions he is suggesting, why, as Geshe-la brought up in the morning, when people were approaching him saying, what is our problem? Where are we going wrong? Because I don't think we can insult the intelligence of all the people on the planet that we don't know where we are going wrong. I think the bottom line comes to that we are unable to overcome in some ways our self-grasping ignorance and our self-centered attitude. And we can look at that at grosser levels or subtler levels, but essentially that is the issue. And why has His Holiness put so much effort to try and take this message out of maybe a traditional setting and a certain kind of understanding into mainstream education systems, mainstream, talking, thinking? As he said recently in the dialogue for our future meeting, he kept saying, finally, we have to change the mind and the thinking. How do we change the mind and the thinking? We focus on holistic education and we focus on the youth. And I want to end by saying that, as Professor Tanuja ji, a lot of us are here because of Venerable Geshe Dorji Damdullah. We are absolutely, indebted for lifetimes for his teaching us. And again, I want to relate this to the courage of the Bodhisattva path, because we can look at all these questions, we can feel overwhelmed. And to be honest, before I met the teachings, I also was feeling tired most of the time at the scale of the issues ahead of us. But when we think about what is possible through a single instant, in this case, a single life of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, trying all these means to get this message, he doesn't need to bother, because he could be thinking that, finally I'm a Tibetan Buddhist monk, or I'm a Tibetan, or I am now this age, I don't need to think about the youth, or, he just did not need to. And relating it to what the morning speakers, Professor Agarwal ji said, and others, that why is he such a great being? Because today also on his birthday, the celebrations are not restricted to any single community or identity axis. Everyone wants to celebrate such a being, his thinking, his courage, because things have not moved in his own land in the direction that perhaps might have been hoped for. But he has never lost courage, and he is beseeching us all. And then there are, like our teacher, Venerable Geshe-la, who is taking kindness on us who may not be able to speak Tibetan or be able to go and retire to study seriously the philosophy many of us wish to. So I think that can be our example when we feel a little bit disheartened and disillusioned, but then we must keep going. So with that, I pray for the long life of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. May he always be seated on a diamond throne and be with us for many decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaveri Gill, for covering this important topic on environment, which is critical in this time of the crisis, the ecological crisis. We are running out of time, and so I call upon Mr. Riaan Kumar to make his presentation on Youth for Universal Ethics. Mr. Riaan Kumar is the founder of the Bodhi Trail, a Delhi-based initiative to promote interfaith harmony. He was recently in the news for organizing the widely appreciated first national conference on faith and public policy that garnered the attendance of thought leaders and policymakers from around the world. Currently, Riaan is conducting research at the Vidhi Center for Legal Research and working with UNESCO on game testing. In line with today's conference, his area of academic expertise lies in exploring the impact of ancient thought on contemporary political structures. He has presented a paper titled Reflections of Buddhism on Modern Democracy, a 21st Century Perspective, at the 3rd International Conference on Multidisciplinary Social Studies, Anthropology, Archaeology, History, and Philosophy, organized by the International Society for Research. So welcome, Riaan, and I invite you to make your presentation.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone. Good evening to the audience. Tibet House Director, Venerable Geshe-la, and to my fellow speakers. I'm humbled to be here on this platform as the youngest member representing Generation Z among such an august gathering on such an auspicious occasion, and would like to wish His Holiness the Dalai Lama a happy birthday. At 11 years old, primarily, with my tryst to create peace and myself first, I started asking the question, who am I? We are meant to be Gen Z, a generation experiencing 20,000 years of change in one lifetime. Today, we are dealing with the question of existence with a planet with frequent climate change issues. We hear war is not good, yet we see Ukraine and Russia on the battlefield. We are being constantly told machines will replace us in the human versus artificial intelligence war. Knowledge, for me, is a click away, and so the question my generation always battles with is what kind of knowledge? Are we here to continue to be the consumers or the creators of this planet? With these questions in mind, we decide to synergize our efforts. If I ask you to look at the presentation, we are neither you nor we are them. We are the I first that looks on infinite possibilities through the window of opportunity shown through the wheel. We are I, and that is what I call Bodhi Trail. At Bodhi Trail, my team and I are working on awakened youth with the humble effort to find answers to these questions. Being a dialoguer generation, it is important to voice our opinions and have views on current topics and shape the future, and that is the impact of universal ethics on us. My project, we continue to work with communities in conflict areas which need our help. In our podcast, we talk about issues and challenges that engage our generation. Recently, we created a platform, the National Conference on Faith and Public Policy, to discuss measures to alleviate communal disharmony by kickstarting a discussion to impact faith on policy making. This is where I met Venerable Geshe-la, who really touched a chord with the young audience on simple messages regarding interdependence as humans. He emphasized how this interconnectedness drives empathy amongst all, and rightly pointed out that peace and unity is what religion teaches us. More often than not, we follow God, but we do not follow what He says, and that's where proper practice will point us to the path of enlightenment. We do research and go deep in learnings from history and past. Today, allow me to go deeper on my research that directly embodies a pragmatic approach towards Buddhism and its principles. My research, Reflections of Buddhism on Modern Democracy, a 21st Century Perspective, was published by the IOSR Journal on Humanities and Social Sciences recently. Frankly, I see this as a culmination of my Buddhist journey that I embarked early on. Allow me to kickstart with a story. As an 11-year-old, I enjoyed playing football, and surprisingly, one day, I saw my teammates holding this small book with a wheel symbol drawn on it. They told me it was a Buddhist chanting book. I knew little about Buddhism in India, much less amongst my friends. I attended meetings, curious to experience the power of chanting, and what I found was beyond my imagination. A curious calm settled as I connected with my environment. Daily chanting helped me mentally, and to study Buddhism as a religion was fascinating in its simple but yet powerful messages. Come to 2019, I founded Bodhi Trail, a platform to promote the core values of Buddha's teachings, to teach us about modern day issues like communal harmony, mental health. And over the past 3-4 years, I have developed deeper in the practice and kept my personal balance, as well as percolate my thoughts on various topics that affect the modern world. And this is where the idea of my research paper started. In my paper, it is argued that Buddhism and democracy are quite congruous, but they are complementary in a much deeper sense. Democracy is strengthened by the values drawn from Buddhist social and moral theory, and Buddhist social moral theory also tends to gain concrete procedural and institutional distinctions when it is through the framework of liberal democratic theory. This is what led me to the objective of my research, to assess the compatibility between democracy and Buddhism, especially leveraging the Pali canon. In my paper, it is not only argued that they're congruous, but also complementary, like I said. Moving on to the research methodology I used to analyze it in the most efficient format. I used thematic research along with secondary research from academia, scriptures written across time. This study was not only based on primary and secondary research, but also suttas such as the Kalma, Anghana, Udana, Vasla, and many others. I used democratic policies and documents from nations of South Asia to draw parallels to assess the impact of Buddhism on modern democracy. Throughout my paper, I investigated different aspects of a vibrant democracy, such as equality, diversity, and governance and tolerance, which makes a democracy flourish. Starting with equality, in the current times, the concept of equality has become increasingly varied with freshly evolving problems such as job allocation, control of natural resources between countries, to political representation of distinct communities, hence its importance. Second, governments and law. In Buddhist society, even the form of governance was monarchy. The use of democratic principles was there. Thirdly, tolerance. Religious tolerance is a key problem even in modern times, and solving it was essential in Buddhist and modern society. Coming to the first theme, when we're talking about democracy, equality is the first thing in mind of people, and this is what we've explored through my paper. The Mahayana Buddhists believe that we, all humans, have inherent Buddha nature, and we have the ability to become enlightened, and hence everyone should be treated equally. There are three sub-themes: caste system, gender, and Sangha. In caste system, Buddha and Buddhism were opposed to the prevalent Brahminical castes, which were hierarchically graded. Gender, according to Buddha, if any woman and man wanted to go in the direction of religious enlightenment, they would approach nirvana. Finally, Sangha. Parameters like birth, family background, economic status, educational levels are considered by the Sangha, the Buddhist society, and it can be related to the society we live in today. Only the age of when one begins to join society. So instead of each other's behavior, knowledge as Artha Shastra is praised. Arahant means having freedom from oneself and the bonds of desire. To actually portray Buddhist thoughts in scriptures, we use scriptures like the Angana Sutra and the Dana Sutra. An interesting depiction for this was in the Madhura Sutra. After Buddha's death, King Avantipur of Madhura visits Venerable Mahakanchana and questions him regarding the Brahminic claims to superiority over other castes. He says and explains that Brahmins experience the result of his actions, both good and bad, in this world and in the next. This is similar to members of other castes, namely noble workers, merchants. A Brahminic aesthetic receives the same homage and respect like anyone from any other caste. And at the end of the discourse, the king of Avantipur agrees with that all caste members are equal with no difference. This depicts the modern principle of no discrimination, such as in Article 15 of the Indian Constitution, through Buddhist stories. Coming to the second theme, governance and law. Governance and law is the basis of any society, and Buddhist society shows an excellent structure. Firstly, kingship and democracy. The foremost Buddhist text, the Tipitaka, contain many references to discourses about governance, policies, rulers, wars, and later Buddhist texts also advise kings about warnings about arrogance. And this is also greatly spoken by the Dalai Lama. Economics. Buddha's teachings take account of issues such as social debasement aggravated by employment, poverty, saving, investment, and income. Social order. Radhakrishna, former president of India, observed that Buddha adopted the Upanishad way with the ideal human being is not by caste but by character. Criminal code and conduct. Teachings focus on eradicating useless social practice through reason and analysis and seeing facts of life as they are. The 5 precepts play a very influential role. In the realm of governance, Buddhism has influenced many monarchs, governments, as is seen today, as a source of legitimacy and authority. This is especially applicable for many countries like India, Burma, Tibet, China, Thailand, specifically the suttas that brought out the the acts of a righteous king. Coming to the final theme, Buddhism proposes peaceful coexistence of religion. Religious tolerance is very important to me, and this is what is portrayed through my paper. Buddhism easily adapts to countries' existing circumstances like Hinduism in India, Confucianism in China, and the cults of spirits of southeastern countries in Asia, and Taoism, and many more. Amity is another theme analyzed by my paper. The Buddha differed radically from the Hindu view that the Matsasyayana is the basic law of nature. Even in the jungle, the law of jungle was not universal, but there was a cooperation and amity amongst the animals as referred in the Jataka tales. And finally, social. The Buddha guided further, stating conquered in action, frequent consultation and meetings, and adherence to injunctions, traditions, and respect for women, elders, and honor the place of worship. The profound philosophy of this religion, permitting the human being will have unrestricted opportunity to perfect itself. A known Buddhist leader, Ashoka, reads, one's tolerance to honor one's man's sect, and this displays tolerance. Tolerance for Buddhism does not include converting the non-Buddhists by force. As pointed out by the Buddhist monk and scholar Vapala Rahula, the spirit of tolerance and understanding had been there from the beginning. And this is why not a single example of persecution or shedding a drop of blood in converting people to Buddhism or in its propagation in its 2,500-year-long history. My findings suggest that religious philosophy and framework within democracy as governance mechanism are compatible with social and cultural values in society. Our findings indicate that Buddhism is democratic in nature, with the relationship between Buddhism and democracy being interwoven. Buddhism seems to be a living faith that is adopted as per the state of affairs of a particular time, place, and culture. This makes it even more pertinent to delve deeper in the principles and to promote a secular and value-based world. This interaction between Buddhism and political principles still resonates in the world in the beginning of the 21st century. Hence, the principle of Buddhism must be leveraged to promote secular value. I want to thank Geshe-la and the Tibet House and the Dalai Lama Foundation for this opportunity to share my views with all of us and to follow such renowned speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Riaan. It was a really enlightening and wonderful presentation. To conclude, and I'm sure you could hold on because it's already past lunchtime. We can, since we have run out of time, we can continue the conversation over lunch, and so we will not have the Q&A session. I thank all the speakers, Dr. Tina Anil, Dr. Tanja Sharma, Dr. Kaveri, Gill, and Mr. Riaan Kumar for their presentations and enlightening us on the universal ethics of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. We hope that we work towards a world that is sustainable, as well as in line with the teachings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So thank you very much, and over to the moderator.
So as Dr. Dennis Fernandes already said, since we are running out of time, we are very sorry to inform you all that we have to skip the question and answer session. So with this, we have come to the end of today's second session. So before we wrap up, I would like to thank our chairperson, Dr. Denzil Fernandes, for chairing this session. And I also would like to thank all our speakers for your very comprehensive, informative and insightful take on the pillars for sustainable good development goals of UNO. And I'm very certain that everyone has gained and learned a lot from this session. So last but not least, I would like to request Dr. S.P. Agarwal ji to kindly offer a khatak and souvenirs to all the speakers and the chairperson.
Thank you.
This is also need to be given?
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Right. I know.
Thank you, Dr. S.P. Agarwalji. So we will now disperse for lunch break for 45 minutes, and I would like to request everyone to be back in the auditorium at 2:10 p.m. Thank you.